My name is Nia, and I am 34 years old. Last night, my husband took me to an exclusive dinner with his new international business partner. I sat there smiling like a fool, pretending I did not understand a single word of their Japanese conversation. I watched my husband lean across the table and tell his partner that the idiot he married had already taken 2 of the special pills. He said that in just a few days I would be gone and they would finally have everything they wanted. I did not scream. I did not cry. I calmly poured myself another glass of wine and replied in perfect Tokyo dialect, Japanese. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic partner who severely underestimated your intelligence. For the past 4 years, I have played the role of the perfect supportive wife to Trayvon. At 36 years old, Trayvon presented himself to the world as a highly successful chief executive officer of a prominent logistics and import-export company based right here in Atlanta. He thrived on the image of Black excellence. He loved walking into our church on Sunday mornings, wearing custom-tailored suits soaking up the admiration of the congregation. He loved the status, the luxury cars, and the elite social circles. And in his mind, I was just another beautiful accessory to complement his carefully curated lifestyle. He assumed I was merely a quiet, agreeable woman who looked good on his arm at corporate galas. He fundamentally believed he was the smartest person in any room he walked into. What Trayvon never bothered to truly understand about me, because he rarely listened when I spoke about my own life, was the depth of my professional background. I am a senior digital forensics and cybersecurity expert. I spend my days analyzing data breaches, dismantling corporate espionage, and uncovering hidden digital footprints for high-level clients. I have spent countless hours dissecting the psychology of criminals who think they are clever enough to hide their tracks. I know exactly how to track illicit funds across international borders, and I know how to recover data that arrogant men believe they have permanently deleted. Before I entered the tech industry, I completed a rigorous double major in computer science and East Asian languages. I spent 2 years studying intensively in Japan. Trayvon knew I worked in tech, but he always dismissed my job as just playing on the computer. He had no idea about my linguistic background because he never once asked about my college years or my life before we met. That brings us to the private dining room of an incredibly exclusive invitation-only sushi restaurant in Buckhead. The lighting was low, the ambiance was intimate, and the bill for the evening would easily rival a mortgage payment. We were there so Trayvon could finalize a major supply chain deal with Hiroshi, a wealthy businessman who had recently flown in from Osaka. The room smelled of expensive jasmine tea and freshly prepared seafood. We were served delicate slices of bluefin tuna and wagyu beef adorned with gold leaf. Every bite was meant to symbolize prosperity and long-lasting partnerships. From the moment we sat down, Trayvon and Hiroshi conversed entirely in rapid Japanese. Trayvon had picked up a decent conversational grasp of the language for his import-export dealings. Whenever Hiroshi glanced my way, Trayvon would wave his hand dismissively and say in Japanese that they did not need to translate for me because I was just his beautiful, simple-minded wife who only cared about shopping and fine dining. I maintained a bright, polite smile, nodding pleasantly, while internally documenting every single insult. The dinner progressed through multiple courses of expensive seafood and premium sake. They discussed shipping routes, offshore accounts, and profit margins. Then the tone of the conversation shifted. The business talk faded, and a darker, far more sinister energy settled over the table. Hiroshi leaned forward, swirling the sake in his ceramic cup, and asked Trayvon about the timeline of their ultimate plan. Trayvon let out a low, arrogant chuckle. He glanced at me, completely confident in my presumed ignorance, and then looked back at Hiroshi. He spoke in clear, deliberate Japanese. He said that the idiot sitting next to him had already taken 2 of the fertility pills he gave her this morning. He smirked and added that the dosage was perfect. In just a few days, her heart would simply stop. He told Hiroshi that the doctors would call it a tragic natural medical event. And once she was gone, they would have the millions from her life insurance and absolute control over everything. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. For a fraction of a second, the entire restaurant seemed to spin. The air was sucked out of my lungs, and a cold, creeping dread spread from my chest down to my fingertips. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs, the blood roaring so loudly in my ears that I thought they might hear it. He was poisoning me. The special holistic fertility supplements Trevon had been so lovingly preparing for me every morning, the pills he claimed would finally help us start the family we had been praying for, were actually lethal. My husband was actively murdering me, and he was sitting right next to me laughing about it with a stranger. My mind raced back to that morning in our pristine kitchen. I remembered the exact texture of the capsule as it went down my throat, the way Trayvon had lovingly stroked my hair as he handed me the glass of water. A wave of profound nausea washed over me, threatening to ruin my composed exterior. I had to force myself to swallow the bile rising in my throat. Panic clawed at my neck, begging me to scream, to flip the heavy wooden table, to run out the front door and call the police immediately. But my professional training instantly kicked in. In the highly classified world of cybersecurity and digital forensics, reacting emotionally to a major security breach is the absolute fastest way to lose the entire war. When a hostile entity infiltrates a secured system, you do not let them know you have spotted them. You observe their movements. You gather irrefutable evidence. You silently lock down the perimeter, and then you completely annihilate them. I took a slow, deep breath through my nose, forcing my racing heart rate to perfectly steady. Masking a panic response was a skill I had perfected in countless high-pressure corporate crises. I kept my posture relaxed. I kept my face completely unbothered. I let the bright, vacant smile remain perfectly fixed on my lips. The waiter approached our table holding a bottle of reserve wine we had ordered earlier. He carefully poured the dark red liquid into my crystal glass. I waited patiently until the waiter bowed respectfully and walked away. The silence between Trayvon and Hiroshi was incredibly thick with their shared murderous secret. I reached forward and wrapped my fingers around the delicate stem of the wine glass. My hand did not shake even a fraction of an inch. My breathing was perfectly controlled. I lifted the glass slightly, bypassing my husband completely, and locked my gaze directly onto Hiroshi's eyes. The warm, polite facade melted away from my face, entirely replaced by an expression of pure absolute ice. In flawless, unaccented Tokyo dialect Japanese, I spoke my first words of the evening to him. I said that it was a terrible shame about their grand plans, but this particular vintage of wine pairs much better with a sudden funeral than a business celebration. The reaction was instantaneous and spectacular. Hiroshi choked hard on his sake, coughing violently into his linen napkin, his dark eyes wide with absolute terror. Trayvon dropped his expensive wooden chopsticks. They clattered loudly against the ceramic plates, shattering the quiet elegance of the private dining room. The blood drained completely from Trayvon's face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. He stared at me, his jaw actually hanging open, his mind completely unable to process what had just happened. The arrogant, untouchable chief executive officer was suddenly reduced to a trembling, panicked mess. The absolute silence that fell over our table was deafening. Trayvon began to sweat profusely. Large beads of moisture formed on his forehead as his eyes darted frantically around the room looking for an escape. He reached out his hand, shaking uncontrollably, and tried to grab my arm. He started stuttering in English, his voice extremely high-pitched and desperate. He tried to tell me that I had gravely misunderstood. He stammered that business Japanese is very complex, that they were using corporate slang about eliminating a competitor company, and that the word for pills was actually a financial term for swallowing a difficult merger. The gaslighting attempt was so pathetic, so poorly constructed, that it was almost insulting to my intelligence. He was desperately trying to convince me that the clear, unambiguous murder plot I had just heard was simply a mistranslation by a confused wife. I sat there watching him sweat, watching the absolute fear completely consume his features. I realized in that exact moment that I could not expose my hand completely. Not yet. If I confronted him now, if I let him know that I fully understood he was actively trying to kill me, he might become physically violent right here. Or he might run away and immediately destroy all the evidence. I needed the rest of those pills. I needed total access to his hidden financial records. I needed to systematically dismantle every single aspect of his fraudulent life from the inside out. So I made the most difficult decision of my entire life. I decided to play the clueless fool one last time. I let my cold expression soften completely. I blinked a few times, acting highly confused and slightly embarrassed. I let out a nervous little laugh and looked at my deceptive husband with wide, innocent eyes. I apologized profusely in English, telling him that my college Japanese was clearly very rusty and that I must have completely misheard the complex context of their corporate merger discussion. I told him I was so incredibly embarrassed for interrupting their important business talk with my silly, uneducated confusion. The sheer immense relief that washed over Trevon's face was sickening to witness. His tense shoulders slumped dramatically, and he let out a massive breath, quickly wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He forced a strained, unnatural laugh, patting my hand condescendingly across the table. He told Hiroshi in English that his beautiful emotional wife just had an overactive imagination. He actually believed he had successfully manipulated me. He thought he had fully regained control of the dangerous situation. He let his arrogant, self-assured smile return, completely unaware that by continually underestimating my intelligence, he had just sealed his own inevitable fate. I smiled back at him, raising my crystal wine glass to my lips, letting him truly think he had won the night. But in my brilliant and calculating mind, the war had already begun, and I was going to ruthlessly ensure that he lost absolutely everything he had ever valued. The ride home was an exercise in pure psychological endurance. I sat in the pristine luxury SUV I had purchased for his birthday. The silence between us was heavy, suffocating, and thick with the unspoken tension of the restaurant. Usually, Trayvon commanded the vehicle like a throne, blasting podcasts and lecturing me about his daily triumphs. Tonight, he drove in frantic, uncharacteristic silence. His knuckles were bone white as he gripped the steering wheel. I could see the rigid tension in his jaw illuminated by the passing streetlights. A cold sheen of perspiration coated his forehead. He kept casting nervous glances in my direction, desperately trying to gauge if my mask of naive confusion was genuine. He could not handle the silence anymore. He cleared his throat very loudly, the sound echoing, and launched into a desperate, unsolicited explanation. He stammered through a convoluted story about Japanese corporate metaphors, claiming that the word for pills was financial jargon for risky investments, and the phrase about my heart stopping was merely an idiom for a company going bankrupt. It was a pathetic, frantic display of gaslighting. A man who truly believed he was a master manipulator was currently scrambling to patch up a fatal breach in his facade. I did not interrupt him. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting calmly in my lap, playing the role of the docile, supportive wife he so desperately needed me to be. I offered him soft, reassuring smiles and polite nods. I told him I completely understood and apologized again for my linguistic misunderstanding. I fed his fragile ego exactly what it so desperately demanded to survive. But beneath that carefully constructed exterior, my mind was racing with terrifying clarity. Every time the heavy doors of the SUV locked, the cold reality of my situation slammed into my chest. I was securely and helplessly strapped into a speeding metal box, cruising down the interstate at 70 miles an hour alone, with a man who was actively, methodically poisoning me to death. I was locked in a cage with my attempted murderer. My survival instincts commanded me to stay absolutely calm. If I showed him even a fraction of the pure horror coursing through my veins, if I challenged his ridiculous lies, he might snap. A cornered narcissist is a dangerous creature. He could easily swerve the car off the bridge. He could pull over into a dark alley. He had already proven to me he was capable of killing me slowly. I had no doubt he was capable of killing me quickly if he felt his grand plan was compromised. So I played the oblivious fool. I let him talk his way out of the corner, watching him slowly convince himself that he had manipulated his naive wife. I kept my breathing even, matching the rhythm of the jazz music playing softly from the dashboard, ensuring my own survival. One agonizing mile at a time, calculating my next tactical move to completely destroy him. As we exited the highway and drove into our exclusive gated community in Buckhead, the immediate panic seemed to finally leave Trayvon's body. Having convinced himself that his murder plot remained a secret, his natural, insufferable arrogance quickly flooded back in to fill the void. He uncurled his white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel and adjusted his designer tie. His frantic stuttering seamlessly transitioned into his usual grandiose complaining. He started ranting about the upcoming charity gala at our megachurch, complaining bitterly that the church elders and the local elite were not giving him the premier seating arrangements he deserved. He scoffed at our wealthy neighbors, claiming they were intimidated by a powerful self-made black chief executive officer. He complained that the society pages did not respect his logistics empire enough, constantly whining about how hard it was to carry the financial burden of our lavish lifestyle on his own shoulders. He spoke with such absolute conviction that a stranger would think he single-handedly built the entire city of Atlanta. I stared out the passenger window at the sprawling mansions passing by, letting his delusional monologue wash over me. The sheer audacity of his complaints was staggering. Trayvon loved to parade around the country club and the church sanctuary as the ultimate provider, soaking up the admiration of everyone who saw his custom suits and imported watches. But I knew the actual math behind the magic. The brutal unspoken truth of our marriage was that Trayvon was nothing but a hollow financial parasite dressed in expensive fabrics. My elite cybersecurity consulting firm funded every aspect of this picturesque life. The massive down payment on the 6-bedroom estate we were currently pulling up to came from a government security contract I secured 3 years ago. The monthly payments for his luxury SUV were deducted from my corporate account. Even the custom-tailored suit he was wearing right now to impress a Japanese money launderer was purchased with my credit card. I had allowed him to claim the spotlight because I preferred the quiet shadows of my digital work. I had actively fed his ego, letting him play the powerful boss, while I quietly managed the real wealth behind the scenes. He was a fragile man standing on a pedestal I built with my own hands, complaining that the view was not spectacular enough. And now this parasite wanted to kill the host. He was not just trying to murder me for freedom. He wanted my life insurance, my assets, and absolute control of the wealth I had accumulated. He wanted to erase me from the equation entirely and keep the empire for himself. I nodded along to his complaints about the church seating arrangements, my face an impenetrable mask. He had no idea that the woman he was casually talking down to had just mentally revoked his access to every dollar he thought he commanded. I would destroy his world. We pulled into the sweeping driveway of our estate, the garage doors opening to swallow the vehicle. Once inside, Trayvon immediately fell back into his sickeningly sweet doting husband routine. He kissed my forehead, asked if I was tired, and gently guided me upstairs to our master suite. The performance was flawless, honed by months of daily practice. I went through the motions of my nightly routine, washing my face and changing into my silk pajamas, maintaining the illusion of domestic normalcy. I could not let my mask slip. When I emerged from the bathroom, Trayvon was standing by my bedside table. He held a small glass of filtered water in one hand and 2 large dark red capsules in the other. These were the special holistic fertility vitamins he had supposedly sourced from an exclusive specialist in California. He had introduced them into my routine 2 weeks ago, claiming they would balance my hormones and finally grant us the family we prayed for. He smiled warmly, his eyes crinkling at the edges with fake adoration. He handed me the water and pills, softly telling me how much he loved me and how excited he was for our future together. The level of sociopathic detachment required to look your wife in the eyes, declare your love, and hand her a lethal dose of poison was staggering. I smiled back, matching his sweet tone, and thanked him. I placed the capsules in my mouth, took a large sip of water, and swallowed visibly. Trayvon watched my throat move, his shoulders relaxing with sick satisfaction. He took the empty glass from my hand, kissed my cheek, and walked into the bathroom to brush his teeth. The second the bathroom door clicked shut, I spat the 2 capsules from under my tongue into the palm of my hand. I wrapped them in a tissue and shoved them deep inside the hidden zipper pocket of my makeup bag, ensuring they were out of sight. An hour later, the massive house was silent. Trayvon was fast asleep beside me, his breathing deep and rhythmic. He slept with the peace of a man who believed his problems were about to disappear. I lay still in the dark, my eyes wide open, staring at the shadows dancing on the ceiling. The man sharing my bed, the man who promised to protect me, was actively waiting for my heart to stop beating. I listened to the steady, ignorant rhythm of his breathing. I was not going to be a tragic victim. I was not going to be a sudden medical event mourned by the church congregation. I am a master of digital warfare trained to dismantle threats with precision. Tomorrow the silent war would begin. I would dissect his fraudulent life, cut his lifelines, and execute a flawless counterstrike. He thought he was putting me to sleep, but he had just awakened his executioner. I was absolutely ready to fight him back and to win this war. The sun had barely begun to illuminate the massive bay windows of our estate when Trayvon left for what he called an early executive strategy meeting. I knew it was just another excuse to play the important businessman while secretly maneuvering his illicit funds. I stood in the center of my pristine marble kitchen sipping a freshly brewed espresso. The house was finally quiet, but that fragile peace did not last long. At exactly 7 in the morning, the heavy mahogany front door swung open with an obnoxious thud. There was no knock, there was no polite ring of the doorbell, just the aggressive rapid clicking of designer heels marching across the imported hardwood floors. It was Keisha. Trayvon's 30-year-old sister possessed the exact same brand of suffocating arrogance as my husband, but with absolutely none of the superficial charm he used to mask it. She carried herself like she owned the very ground she walked on, despite not holding a steady job in 5 long years. Keisha barged into the kitchen carrying an oversized counterfeit designer handbag and wearing a scowl that seemed permanently etched into her features. She did not say good morning. She did not offer a standard greeting. Instead, she immediately ran her manicured finger along the edge of my granite countertop, inspecting it for non-existent dust. She loudly criticized my choice of interior decor, claiming the minimalist aesthetic felt too cold and unwelcoming for a real family. I watched her parade around my kitchen with a mild, detached fascination. I simply stared at her. Yesterday, her entitled behavior would have simply annoyed me. Today, observing her felt entirely different. Knowing what I knew about her brother's lethal intentions, her sudden unannounced arrival felt incredibly sinister. I realized she was not just here to annoy me. She was checking in on the investment. She was here to monitor the progress of the poison. Keisha dropped her heavy bag onto one of my velvet bar stools and crossed her arms over her chest. She looked me up and down with undisguised contempt. Her eyes narrowed as she zeroed in on my calm demeanor. She demanded to know if I had taken the special fertility supplements Trayvon prepared for me. Her voice was sharp and accusatory, carrying the undeniable weight of an interrogation rather than sisterly concern. She insisted that her brother was spending a small fortune on these exclusive vitamins just to fix my broken reproductive system. She leaned across the kitchen island, invading my personal space, and demanded I show her the pill bottle. She wanted verbal confirmation that I was swallowing every single capsule exactly as instructed. I maintained my perfectly neutral expression, holding my espresso cup steady, while looking directly into her hostile eyes. I told her I was managing my health routine just fine. My calm, deflective answer did not satisfy her. It only fueled her aggressive sense of entitlement and set the stage for an explosive confrontation. Keisha slammed her hand flat against the granite countertop. The loud smack echoed through the spacious kitchen, but I did not flinch. She stepped around the island, completely invading my personal space, her face contorted with vicious anger. She launched into a highly toxic, aggressive tirade designed to completely break my spirit. She aggressively shamed me for my inability to give her brother a child. She spat out cruel insults, calling me a defective wife who was selfishly withholding a legacy from a powerful black man. She leaned in close, her voice dripping with venom, and told me that a woman who cannot breed is not a real woman at all. She claimed Trayvon was an absolute saint for staying with a barren burden like me when he could easily find a younger, more capable woman to build his empire. Every single word was carefully weaponized, pulling from the deeply patriarchal narratives they used to justify their terrible behavior. She thought she was piercing my deepest insecurities. She thought her cruel rhetoric would reduce me to a weeping, submissive mess, just like it had in the past. But she was severely mistaken. Her toxic words simply bounced off the impenetrable armor I had erected overnight. I felt absolutely nothing but cold clinical calculation. Furious that I was not breaking down in tears, Keisha marched directly over to the custom spice cabinet where Trevon kept his precious holistic supplements. She aggressively snatched the dark amber bottle from the shelf and shook it loudly in my face. The lethal red capsules rattled against the glass. She popped the child-proof cap open, dumped 2 of the toxic pills into her palm, and slammed a glass of tap water onto the counter. She commanded me to take the morning dose right in front of her. She insisted she was not leaving my kitchen until she physically watched me swallow the pills to ensure I was not being a defiant, ungrateful wife. I stood my ground perfectly. She thrust her hand toward my face, shoving the poison inches from my mouth. The sheer audacity of this parasite trying to force-feed me my own death sentence was breathtaking. My patience evaporated instantly. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. I coldly raised my arm and slapped her hand away with a sharp, forceful strike. The 2 red capsules flew out of her palm and bounced across the pristine marble floor. Keisha gasped in sheer shock, cradling her wrist. She looked at me as if a ghost had just slapped her. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until she was forced to back up against the stainless steel refrigerator. My eyes locked onto hers with a terrifying frozen intensity. I told her in a low, dangerous whisper that she would never force anything down my throat, and she would never disrespect me in my own home ever again. Keisha was visibly stunned by my sudden physical boundary, but her shock quickly mutated into defensive rage. Her true motive for this hostile morning invasion finally surfaced. She dropped the fake concern about my fertility and pivoted aggressively to financial extortion. She yelled that I owed this family for putting up with my disrespectful, barren attitude. She aggressively demanded I write her a check for $20,000 immediately. She claimed her credit cards were maxed out from funding her luxury lifestyle, and she needed the cash to avoid a humiliating lawsuit from her creditors. She was a pathetic parasite. She actually had the nerve to say that $20,000 was a small price to pay to keep her brother happy with a defective wife. The sheer magnitude of her delusion was almost laughable. I stared at this demanding, entitled woman and decided the time for playing nice was permanently over. I unleashed a brutal, unrelenting verbal evisceration of her entire fraudulent existence. I lowered my voice to a sharp, commanding tone and methodically dismantled her fake reality. I told her she was a 30-year-old financial infant who relied on my bank accounts to survive. I reminded her with excruciating detail exactly who paid the massive lease on her precious white BMW parked in my driveway right now. I listed the exact amounts I had personally wired to cover her luxury apartment rent for the past 2 years. I stripped away every ounce of her pride, exposing the undeniable truth that her beloved, successful brother was completely broke, and that my elite tech contracts funded their entire pathetic charade. I told her the Bank of Nia was permanently closed. I watched her face crumble from arrogant entitlement to genuine panic as the reality of my words sank in. I did not give her a single second to recover. I pointed my finger directly at the front door and ordered her to get out of my house immediately before I called the police and reported her for trespassing. Keisha tried to stammer out a threat, but the absolute murderous intent in my eyes silenced her completely. She grabbed her fake designer bag and practically sprinted out of the kitchen, her designer heels stumbling over the hardwood floors. The heavy front door slammed shut behind her, leaving the house in complete silence once again. I stood alone in the kitchen, breathing evenly. I calmly walked over to the corner where the 2 red capsules had rolled. I crouched down and carefully picked up the lethal pills with a fresh paper towel. I dropped them into a small, sterile plastic baggie I had brought down from my office kit and sealed it tightly. I slipped the baggie into my blazer pocket. The physical evidence was perfectly secured. Keisha thought she was executing a successful shakedown, but she had just handed me the murder weapon. It was time to go to the lab. I picked up my car keys and walked directly to my black sports car parked in the garage, feeling utterly unstoppable. Today would change everything. I reversed my black sports car out of the massive garage and sped down the winding roads of our gated community. The morning sun glared fiercely against my windshield, but the interior of my car felt ice cold. My destination was not the downtown corporate headquarters where my cybersecurity team awaited my arrival. Instead, I drove straight toward the gritty industrial outskirts of Atlanta. I needed absolute discretion, and the standard police department protocol would take entirely too long. Worse, it would require filing an official report that Trayvon could easily uncover through his expensive defense lawyers. I needed hard, undeniable chemical proof before I triggered the final explosion. I pulled into the crumbling parking lot of an unassuming brick warehouse. There were no flashy signs or corporate logos, just a heavily reinforced steel door equipped with a biometric retinal scanner. This was the private off-the-books laboratory run by Elijah. Elijah was a former elite digital forensics operative from my early days in government contracting. He had left the cyber warfare sector 5 years ago to launch a highly specialized biochemistry and toxicology testing facility for private intelligence firms. He owed me his entire career after I completely scrubbed a fatal digital error that would have sent him to federal prison. We operated on a strict code of absolute loyalty and complete silence. I bypassed the outer security perimeter and walked directly into his sterile, brightly lit laboratory. Elijah looked up from his microscope, his brow furrowing with deep concern when he saw the cold, clinical expression permanently frozen on my face. I did not waste a single second on pleasantries or small talk. I reached into the tailored pocket of my designer blazer and pulled out the sealed plastic baggie containing the 2 dark red capsules. I slapped the baggie flat onto his stainless steel examination table. I looked Elijah dead in the eyes and commanded him to drop every single lucrative corporate contract he was currently processing. I instructed him to run a full-spectrum emergency toxicological analysis on those capsules immediately. Elijah stared at the red pills and then back at my perfectly unbothered face. He asked me what exactly we were looking for. I kept my voice terrifyingly calm and told him we were looking for the exact chemical compound my husband was currently using to actively murder me. Elijah did not gasp or ask any further questions. He understood the lethal gravity of the situation instantly. He grabbed a pair of latex gloves, secured the plastic baggie, and promised me a comprehensive breakdown before the end of the business day. I slowly turned around and walked out of the sterile laboratory without ever looking back. The physical murder weapon was finally in the hands of an expert I trusted with my life. Now I just had to survive the rest of the day while projecting the flawless illusion of a happily married woman and managing the daily operations of my thriving corporate empire. I drove straight to my executive office in the heart of downtown Atlanta. The glass walls of my corner suite offered a commanding view of the city skyline, a stark reminder of the immense corporate empire I had built entirely from scratch. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair, smoothed the invisible wrinkles from my designer skirt, and opened my encrypted laptop. The workday demanded absolute perfection. I had 3 high-stakes virtual meetings scheduled with international defense contractors and wealthy corporate executives who relied entirely on my unmatched expertise to secure their digital assets. I logged into my first video conference, projecting the ultimate facade of the strong, independent, and unbothered Black woman. I delivered my security briefings with flawless precision, breaking down complex digital vulnerabilities while commanding the virtual room with absolute authority. No one staring at my perfectly lit camera feed could ever guess that the confident chief executive officer advising them on corporate espionage was currently calculating the exact timeline of her own calculated survival. I compartmentalized the raging storm of betrayal inside my mind, sealing it behind a heavy titanium vault of pure professionalism. While I was effortlessly securing multi-million-dollar tech contracts, my personal cell phone buzzed softly on my pristine glass desk. It was a text message from Trayvon. The screen illuminated, displaying a sickeningly sweet message filled with red heart emojis. He called me his beautiful queen and proudly declared how incredibly lucky he was to have such a devoted, loving wife supporting his monumental vision. He promised to take me out for a luxurious romantic dinner this weekend to celebrate our beautiful life together. The absolute psychotic duality of his behavior sent a sharp chill directly down my spine. The man sending me digital kisses and showering me with fake affection was the exact same man eagerly anticipating the sudden catastrophic failure of my heart. He was meticulously laying down a digital paper trail of the loving, devastated husband. When I inevitably dropped dead, he would show these exact text messages to the church congregation, the local police, and our wealthy neighbors to prove how deeply and passionately he loved his tragic late wife. He was scripting my entire murder right in front of my eyes. I picked up the phone and typed back a perfectly crafted response. I told him I loved him endlessly and could not wait to celebrate our grand future together as husband and wife. I sent the message adding a matching heart emoji just to feed his massive delusional ego. Every single lie I typed tasted like bitter ash in my mouth, but I swallowed it down with clinical precision. I was playing a high-stakes game of psychological chess against a ruthless sociopath, and I absolutely refused to lose a single piece. I placed the phone face down on the glass desk, forcing my attention completely back to the glowing monitors. The agonizing waiting game continued endlessly as the tense hours slowly passed. At exactly 4 in the afternoon, my encrypted private line rang sharply, cutting through the quiet hum of my executive suite. The caller identification displayed a secure, untraceable proxy number. It was Elijah. I locked my office door, closed the heavy automated blinds, and answered the call. Elijah did not bother greeting me. His voice was grim, entirely devoid of his usual confident swagger. He told me the chemical breakdown of the dark red capsules was absolutely horrifying. The pills were not cheap counterfeit vitamins or misguided holistic supplements. They contained a highly sophisticated synthesized digitalis derivative, heavily laced with a rare obscure botanical toxin. Elijah explained that this specific lethal cocktail was meticulously engineered to accumulate silently within the cardiovascular system over a period of 2 to 3 weeks. It was designed to slowly, fatally weaken the cardiac muscle tissue without triggering any immediate alarming physical symptoms. Once the toxic threshold was finally reached, it would trigger a massive catastrophic heart attack that would kill me instantly. The most terrifying part of the chemical design was its rapid degradation. Elijah warned me that within 12 hours of my sudden death, the active toxic compounds would completely break down and seamlessly mimic natural underlying heart failure. A standard police autopsy or basic hospital toxicology screen would reveal absolutely nothing suspicious. The medical examiner would officially rule it a tragic, unexpected natural death. Trayvon would collect my massive life insurance payout, play the devastated mourning widower, and walk away entirely scot-free. He was not just a greedy, incompetent businessman leaning on his successful wife. He was a highly calculating, incredibly dangerous, cold-blooded sociopath who had sourced an untraceable assassin weapon. The sheer magnitude of his dark betrayal threatened to crush the breath right out of my lungs. He had been looking me in the eyes, kissing my lips, and warmly holding my hands while actively feeding me a chemical death sentence. He had weaponized my deepest vulnerabilities, using my quiet hope for a family to mask his lethal dosage. The chilling realization completely extinguished any tiny lingering fraction of mercy left inside my soul. The shock abruptly faded away, instantly replaced by a burning, freezing rage that focused my mind with terrifying crystalline clarity. My husband thought he could outsmart a master of digital forensics. He mistakenly believed his analog poison would permanently silence the one woman who held the literal keys to his entire fraudulent kingdom. I thanked Elijah, hung up the secure phone, and opened a fresh, heavily encrypted terminal on my dual monitor setup. The time for quietly waiting and passively observing was permanently over. It was time to completely incinerate his fake reality. I cracked my knuckles, staring at the blank command prompt flashing on the black screen. I was going to systematically dismantle his entire life bite by bite. I would violently drag his darkest secrets screaming into the unforgiving light. I initiated a full-scale digital teardown of his existence, ready to strike. The heavy grandfather clock in the hallway struck 2 in the morning when I finally slipped out of our king-sized bed. Trayvon was sleeping soundly beside me, snoring with the unbothered rhythm of a man who believed his deadly plan was safely in motion. I moved across the plush carpet with absolute silence, my bare feet making no sound as I navigated the dark hallways of the sprawling estate my own money had purchased. My destination was the massive mahogany door at the end of the east wing. Trayvon referred to it as his executive command center. He spent hours locked inside, holding loud, aggressive phone calls to project the image of a busy chief executive officer. I had rarely entered the room respecting the boundary he aggressively enforced. Tonight, I was going to rip the hinges off his digital fortress. I pushed the heavy door open and stepped into the black room. The air smelled of expensive cologne. I did not turn on the overhead lights. Instead, I pulled a small pen light from my pocket and illuminated his massive custom-built workstation. Sitting right in the center was his sleek laptop he constantly bragged was equipped with military-grade encryption. Trayvon thought he was a technological genius because he paid a security firm $10,000 to install top-tier firewalls and biometric locks. He completely forgot that he was married to the woman who literally designs those exact same architectures for government intelligence agencies. I sat down in his oversized leather executive chair and opened the laptop lid. The screen flared to life, instantly demanding a fingerprint scan and a complex alphanumeric password. Trayvon always assumed his biometric security was entirely foolproof. He had no idea how vulnerable a sleeping narcissist actually is. Before leaving the bedroom, I had carefully pressed a specialized silicone molding compound against his right index finger while he was deeply asleep, dreaming about my funeral. The mold captured his fingerprint with microscopic precision. I pulled the thin silicone strip from my pocket and gently pressed it against the glowing biometric scanner on his laptop. The machine whirred softly, and a green checkmark flashed across the screen, confirming the biometric bypass. The physical lock was defeated, but the secondary encrypted firewall immediately triggered, throwing up a massive red digital barricade. I plugged a small custom-built flash drive into the side port of the machine. The drive contained a highly aggressive brute-force decryption algorithm I had personally written during my time as a private contractor. I typed a rapid sequence of commands bypassing his primary operating system entirely and attacking the foundational code of his security software. The screen turned into a waterfall of rapidly scrolling code. My heart pounded a steady drumbeat against my ribs as I watched the decryption progress bar slowly climb. The silence of the house felt incredibly oppressive. Every single creak of the floorboards or rustle of the wind outside threatened to shatter my intense focus. If Trayvon walked into this office now, I would have to fight for my life. The progress bar hit 99% and hung there for 3 agonizing seconds. I held my breath, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, ready to trigger a massive system wipe if the firewall flagged my intrusion. Then, with a soft chime, the red barricade vanished completely. The screen cleared, revealing the pristine desktop of his secret digital life. The digital gates were completely wide open. I cracked my knuckles and cracked a very cold smile. I was officially inside the belly of the beast. I immediately navigated to the master financial directory, diving straight into the core accounting folders of his grand logistics empire. Trayvon loved to boast at church functions about his massive fleet of cargo ships and endless supply chain contracts. He walked around Atlanta handing out heavy gold-embossed business cards, pretending he was a titan of industry. It took me less than 4 minutes of scrolling through his raw banking ledgers to realize his entire professional identity was a spectacular, fraudulent illusion. The company was not a thriving enterprise. It was a completely hollow shell corporation hemorrhaging cash at an absolutely catastrophic rate. I opened a folder labeled Quarterly Profits and scoffed at the blatant absurdity of the documents inside. There were no actual profits. Trayvon had not secured a single legitimate shipping contract in over 3 long years. Every single invoice, spreadsheet, and tax document stored on his hard drive had been meticulously forged to present the illusion of a highly profitable operation. He was using a chaotic web of dummy accounts to constantly move the same dwindling pool of money back and forth across different offshore banks, creating fake transaction volumes to fool our nosy country club neighbors and the local tax authorities. He was playing a desperate high-stakes shell game just to maintain his facade of black excellence. The deeper I dug into his hidden financial spreadsheets, the more the sickening reality of my marriage came into razor-sharp focus. Trevon was completely broke. His corporate bank accounts were massively overdrawn, and his credit lines were entirely exhausted. I tracked a series of automated wire transfers and felt a sharp surge of blinding anger. I discovered that for the past 2 years, he had been quietly skimming massive amounts of money from our joint household accounts, the accounts heavily funded by my lucrative cybersecurity contracts, to desperately plug the massive financial leaks in his sinking fake company. He was literally using my own hard-earned wealth to prop up his pathetic, fragile ego, while simultaneously plotting to end my life. I downloaded every single forged invoice, fake shipping manifest, and falsified tax return, copying gigabytes of damning evidence directly onto my encrypted flash drive. The magnificent chief executive officer was nothing but a desperate broke con artist wearing imported Italian suits. He had built a fragile house of cards on a foundation of absolute lies, and the structural integrity of his entire universe was currently resting entirely in my capable hands. I meticulously highlighted his fraudulent ledger entries, ensuring every single discrepancy was perfectly documented for the upcoming legal slaughter. His fake empire was officially exposed, and his reputation would soon be completely annihilated before the eyes of the entire community he desperately tried to impress. I smiled very coldly, downloading the last file, verifying the absolute bankruptcy of his truly pathetic existence, finalizing my total and complete financial review. I knew with absolute certainty that this fake king would violently lose his paper crown forever. The financial ruins were only one part of his twisted puzzle. I needed to understand exactly why Trevon was desperate enough to resort to poisoning his own wife. I opened a separate encrypted folder hidden deep within the system registry labeled International Partnerships. Inside, I found hundreds of carefully encrypted email exchanges and private messages entirely written in Japanese. I quickly ran the text through my decryption software, translating the messages into plain English in real time. The communications were exclusively between Trevon and Hiroshi, the man I had confronted just hours earlier at the sushi restaurant. The translated messages painted a terrifying picture of a man drowning in a lethal underworld. Trevon was not importing or exporting any legitimate goods at all. He was using the hollow shell of his logistics company to aggressively launder millions of dollars in dirty money for a ruthless overseas criminal syndicate tied directly to Hiroshi. Trevon had promised the syndicate that his company could seamlessly wash their illicit funds through the Atlanta commercial port system. But Trevon was arrogant and dangerously incompetent. He had mismanaged the laundering operation, completely losing nearly $4 million of syndicate money in terrible, amateurish investments, trying to quickly double his personal cut. The messages from Hiroshi had shifted over the past 3 months, from polite business inquiries to explicit violent threats. Hiroshi demanded full repayment of the missing $4 million by the end of the current fiscal quarter. He clearly promised Trevon that if the massive debt was not fully settled immediately, severe fatal consequences would rapidly follow for him and his family. Trevon was completely trapped. He was drowning in massive syndicate debt and being hunted by incredibly dangerous men who would not hesitate to kill him. He had absolutely zero ways to generate $4 million legitimately. He was desperate, cornered, and terrified for his own life. The only possible way he could ever survive the wrath of the overseas syndicate was to somehow acquire a sudden massive windfall of untraceable cash. The dark, terrifying motive behind the lethal fertility pills suddenly became undeniably clear. I was never his beloved wife. I was simply his final, desperate financial bailout. Every single kiss, every sweet word, and every promise he ever made to me was nothing more than a highly calculated step toward my inevitable murder to erase his horrible debts forever. He was doomed. The chilling realization of his massive syndicate debt explained the desperate motive for his murder plot, but it did not explain the sheer magnitude of his financial greed. I dug much deeper into the hidden digital directories, determined to uncover every single layer of his depravity. I navigated away from the fake logistics manifests and opened a highly secured subfolder deceptively labeled as routine corporate liability documents. Instead of boring business insurance forms, I found something that made my blood run absolute ice cold. Over the past 6 months, while smiling in my face and praying with me at church, Trevin had secretly taken out 3 entirely separate massive life insurance policies solely on my life. I stared at the digital PDF documents, my eyes scanning the staggering numbers printed on the screen. The first policy was secured for $2 million. The second policy was for an additional $2 million. The third and final policy, secured just 3 weeks ago, right before he introduced the lethal holistic fertility pills into my morning routine, was for a clean $1 million, $5 million total. That was the exact calculated monetary value my husband had ruthlessly placed on my sudden tragic demise. $5 million would instantly erase his $4 million syndicate debt to Hiroshi and leave him with a clean, cool million in pure tax-free profit to completely restart his life as a wealthy, unbothered widower. I zoomed in on the signature lines of the digital insurance contracts. He had expertly forged my signature on every single document, perfectly mimicking my distinct handwriting. But the absolute worst part was not the massive amount of money or the blatant felony forgery. The most sickening detail was listed right under the primary beneficiary designations. Trevin had allocated 80% of the massive payout directly to his own personal offshore accounts. The remaining 20%, an entirely cool $1 million, was legally designated to go directly to his sister Keisha. The hostile, greedy woman who had barged into my kitchen just hours earlier, aggressively demanding $20,000 and trying to force-feed me a lethal dose of poison, was officially actively conspiring with her brother to execute my murder for a massive 7-figure payday. She was not just an entitled, annoying parasite feeding off my immense success. She was a fully invested financial stakeholder in my physical assassination. The sheer coordinated evil of their sibling bond was absolutely breathtaking to witness. They sat together at family dinners, smiling and passing the potatoes while quietly calculating exactly how they would divide the massive financial spoils of my impending funeral. My husband and his toxic sister had turned my living, breathing body into a lucrative guaranteed lottery ticket. They completely underestimated the woman they were trying to cash out. I carefully downloaded every single page of the fraudulent life insurance contracts, saving them securely to my encrypted flash drive, ensuring the federal authorities would possess a perfect paper trail. The life insurance policies were entirely sufficient to put Trevin away for a highly extended federal prison sentence, but my digital investigation was far from over. A narcissist like Trevin never operates purely out of fear. He was certainly trying to escape his massive syndicate debt, but his arrogant vanity demanded an additional reward for his murderous efforts. He was not just executing a brutal financial escape plan, he was actively, aggressively funding a completely separate double life. I continued to tear through the deepest layers of his encrypted file system, relentlessly scanning for any hidden drives. My custom algorithm finally flagged a heavily partitioned directory buried deep within a system operations folder. It was masked as a boring software update package, but I instantly recognized the complex encryption signature. I ran my brute force script, completely shattering the digital lock in under 2 minutes. The folder burst open, instantly flooding my laptop screen with hundreds of high-resolution photographs and saved chat logs. I stared at the bright images, feeling my stomach twist into a cold, tight knot. The photographs documented an entire parallel universe that my husband had meticulously constructed right behind my back. The star of this hidden gallery was a vibrant 23-year-old Instagram model who looked absolutely nothing like me. She had flowing, brightly colored hair, dramatic designer outfits, and a perfectly curated social media aesthetic. But the most glaring detail, the detail that completely shattered the remaining fragments of my sanity, was her extremely prominent, heavily pregnant stomach. She was currently 6 months pregnant, carrying the son my husband had repeatedly claimed he wanted to build with me. I clicked through dozens of sickeningly intimate photos. There were pictures of Trayvon and this young woman kissing passionately on expensive private yachts, dining at exclusive luxury resorts, and shopping for lavish baby clothes in high-end boutiques. He was treating her like an absolute queen while utilizing my personal corporate earnings to effortlessly fund her entire luxurious existence. He was aggressively lavishing his pregnant mistress with the exact same extravagant lifestyle I had single-handedly paid for. But the absolute final agonizing twist of the knife was not just the blatant infidelity or the secret impending child. As I continued scrolling rapidly through the extensive photo gallery, a very familiar, horribly smug face repeatedly popped up in the background of their lavish celebrations. It was Keisha. My toxic sister-in-law was prominently featured in countless photographs, standing proudly beside the young mistress holding shopping bags and laughing joyously at upscale baby showers. I quickly opened the saved chat logs between Trayvon and Keisha, entirely confirming my darkest suspicions. Keisha had not just stumbled upon the affair. She was the actual malicious architect who originally orchestrated it. The text messages clearly revealed that Keisha had deliberately introduced Trayvon to this specific young woman nearly a year ago. She had aggressively encouraged her brother to step outside his marriage, continuously mocking my inability to conceive a child. Keisha and Trayvon had spent months laughing together through digital text messages, openly celebrating the fact that his beautiful young mistress was finally giving the family a powerful male heir. They viciously joked about how my impending tragic medical event would perfectly pave the way for his new glowing bride to step seamlessly into my luxurious, completely paid-off lifestyle. They viewed me as nothing more than a temporary, heavily funded obstacle standing directly in the way of their ultimate happily ever after. The sheer profound level of coordinated familial betrayal was absolutely staggering to comprehend. The final puzzle piece, hiding deep within the encrypted folders, completely solidified their deeply malevolent grand scheme. I navigated through a carefully concealed directory labeled as offshore tax documentation and rapidly uncovered a massive stack of highly detailed real estate purchase contracts. Trayvon had not merely rented a small, discreet apartment for his heavily pregnant young mistress. Using a highly complex, sophisticated web of fraudulent wire transfers routed directly through my personal cybersecurity consulting corporate accounts, he had secretly and aggressively purchased a spectacular $1.2 million luxury beachfront condominium located precisely in the most exclusive, wealthy neighborhood of Miami. The digital deed was perfectly registered, strictly under the young mistress name, effectively shielding the massive property completely from any upcoming marital asset division or standard divorce proceedings. I analyzed the specific financial transaction dates recorded on the official banking ledgers. The massive luxury condo purchase perfectly aligned with the exact same week he originally introduced the lethal holistic fertility poison into my daily morning routine. His entire horrifying timeline suddenly became flawlessly, completely, undeniably transparent. They meticulously planned to use the massive $5 million fraudulent life insurance payout to instantly settle his catastrophic $4 million blood debt with Hiroshi and the violent overseas criminal syndicate. The remaining clean $1 million would perfectly fund his immediate, highly tragic relocation to the beautiful sunny shores of Miami, where he would seamlessly start a fresh, wealthy new life with his glowing young bride and his brand new son. My complete physical death was literally the final required financial transaction needed to successfully close his ultimate luxury real estate deal. The sheer absolute chilling audacity of his murderous ambition was almost mechanically perfect in its execution. He genuinely truly believed he was infinitely smarter than everyone else around him. He thought his beautiful silent trophy wife was completely, utterly oblivious to the massive digital execution block he had securely built directly under her very own feet. I calmly disconnected my encrypted flash drive from his computer, completely securing the absolute final devastating piece of physical evidence. I wiped every single digital fingerprint of my covert midnight intrusion, leaving his protective firewalls perfectly intact and totally undisturbed. The incredibly elaborate fake kingdom Trayvon had ruthlessly built with my hard-earned money was officially fully mapped out, completely documented, and absolutely ready to be systematically, violently, utterly, permanently, completely destroyed. I did not shed a single tear as I slipped out of his dark office and returned to our bedroom. Crying is a biological response reserved for victims who have completely lost control of their circumstances. I was not a victim. I was a highly trained operative who had just been handed the complete architectural blueprints of my enemy's crumbling fortress. As the first rays of morning light began to bleed through the heavy silk curtains of our master bedroom, I was already aggressively mobilizing my elite counteroffensive. My first immediate phone call was not to the local police or to a standard divorce attorney. I reached out to Marcus Thorne, my highly exclusive corporate wealth management lawyer, who specialized in impenetrable financial defense for elite high net worth individuals. Marcus was ruthless, brilliantly cunning, and completely loyal to my corporate retainer. I arranged a highly secure encrypted virtual meeting with him before Trayvon even woke up to execute his daily fraudulent performance. I explained the sheer gravity of my rapidly deteriorating situation, providing Marcus with a meticulous breakdown of Trayvon's massive hidden debts and his terrifyingly clear, murderous intentions. I instructed Marcus to instantly initiate the absolute most aggressive, legally impenetrable financial lockdown protocol available within the international banking system. Marcus worked with absolute precision to ensure every dollar was completely hidden behind multiple layers of corporate anonymity. My husband had spent months meticulously planning my murder to fund his new life in Miami with his young pregnant mistress. I spent 48 hours ensuring that even if he somehow managed to kill me, he would inherit nothing but crushing debt and legal devastation. The speed and efficiency of my asset relocation was a masterclass in financial defense. I locked down my empire. Over the next 48 agonizing but highly productive hours, I systematically and ruthlessly bled my husband completely dry of every single financial resource he thought he commanded. Utilizing my deep knowledge of digital asset protection and Marcus's ruthless legal maneuvering, we rapidly established a labyrinth of ironclad blind offshore trusts located in jurisdictions that completely refused to cooperate with standard United States domestic asset division mandates. I aggressively transferred every single penny of my massive personal savings, my lucrative corporate consulting income, and all my highly valuable intellectual property patents directly into these untouchable phantom accounts. Trayvon had spent the last 2 years casually skimming massive amounts of money from our joint household, checking and savings accounts to desperately plug the massive leaks in his failing logistics company. I left exactly enough money in those joint accounts to comfortably fully cover the automatic mortgage draft for our estate, ensuring Trayvon would not receive any sudden alarming notifications from his banking applications. However, I completely severed his access to my primary corporate revenue streams, effectively choking off his entire financial lifeblood without triggering any immediate red flags. He was completely cut off from the massive wealth he believed he was about to inherit. I meticulously scoured every single financial document, completely removing his name as a designated authorized representative from my corporate entities. I legally dissolved any lingering financial connections we shared, silently turning him into a completely broke, isolated island. He had absolutely no idea that while he was eagerly waiting for the toxic botanical poison to finally stop my heart, I had already successfully executed a massive, flawless financial assassination against his entire fake empire. He was now a dead man walking, completely stripped of his stolen resources, left with nothing but his massive $4 million syndicate debt and his absolute delusional arrogance, with the foundational assets completely locked away behind Marcus's impenetrable legal walls. I shifted my intense focus directly to the $5 million in fraudulent life insurance policies Trayvon had secretly purchased. Trayvon truly believed he was a master manipulator, but his monumental arrogance had caused him to make a catastrophic administrative error. He had forged my signature to officially open the policies, which legally established me as the primary insured individual and the ultimate owner of the contracts. Because he used my personal identifying information and my corporate banking details to silently pay the monthly premiums, I possessed the absolute legal authority to unilaterally modify the terms of the policies without ever notifying him. Sitting alone in the dark quiet of my home office, I logged directly into the insurance provider's highly secured portal using my authenticated credentials. My hands moved across the illuminated keyboard with lethal, unrelenting purpose. I navigated straight to the beneficiary designation screens, where Trayvon had so proudly listed himself to receive 80% of the payout, and his toxic sister Keisha to receive the remaining 20%. The sheer audacity of their murderous greed burned brightly in my mind as I highlighted their names on the digital forms. With a single deeply satisfying keystroke, I completely erased Trayvon and Keisha from the contracts forever. I ruthlessly severed their access to the massive financial reward they were so eagerly anticipating. I then meticulously designated a highly respected national charity organization that specifically supported and sheltered survivors of severe domestic violence to become the sole, absolute beneficiary of the entire $5 million payout. I established an ironclad legal stipulation ensuring the massive funds could never be contested, redirected, or accessed by any immediate family members under any circumstances. If the highly lethal botanical toxin circulating in my system somehow managed to stop my heart before my master plan concluded, Trevin would absolutely not receive a single dime. Instead of waking up as a wealthy, unbothered widower ready to start a lavish new life in Miami with his young, pregnant mistress, he would wake up to discover that his murdered wife had posthumously donated his entire fraudulent retirement fund to a charity dedicated to protecting women from monsters exactly like him. He would be left staring at a completely empty bank account while the violent overseas syndicate aggressively demanded their missing $4 million. The sheer poetic justice of weaponizing his own malicious greed against him was incredibly intoxicating. I carefully downloaded the updated legally binding insurance contracts, verifying that my aggressive modifications were permanently cemented into the corporate database. I smiled a cold, terrifying smile as I securely wiped my browsing history and powered down the heavy desktop computer. Trevon was currently dreaming about his impending massive payout, completely unaware that his precious $5 million golden ticket had just been permanently incinerated. He was officially hunting for a treasure chest that no longer existed. He was indeed just a completely pathetic and incredibly blind fool. With the entire financial battlefield successfully rigged and the digital execution orders firmly established in the shadows, I seamlessly transitioned back into my meticulously crafted domestic role. The absolute most critical component of this dangerous psychological warfare was maintaining Trayvon's unwavering delusion that he was still the undisputed king of our household. For the next several days, I continued to play the flawlessly loving, highly submissive wife. I cooked his favorite meals, ironed his custom designer shirts, and greeted him at the front door every evening with a bright, welcoming smile. More importantly, I began to strategically manifest the exact physical symptoms he was so desperately eager to observe. Knowing that his lethal botanical poison was specifically engineered to slowly weaken the cardiovascular system, I intentionally acted profoundly fatigued. I started taking long, uncharacteristic naps during the early afternoon, ensuring he would find me sleeping heavily when he returned from his fraudulent corporate meetings. I complained softly about strange shortness of breath after simply walking up the sweeping mahogany staircase. I would clutch my chest lightly, massaging my collarbone, while offering him a weak, apologetic smile. Every single time I performed these carefully calculated moments of physical distress, I could actually see the sick, triumphant spark ignite brightly within his dark eyes. His monstrous arrogance grew exponentially with every passing hour. He became incredibly bold, leaving his encrypted laptop casually open on the kitchen island and openly taking hushed, aggressive phone calls from his dangerous Japanese syndicate handlers right in our backyard. He was entirely convinced that I was rapidly fading away, fading into a convenient, highly profitable memory. He treated me with a disgusting, exaggerated gentleness, constantly bringing me cups of herbal tea and softly encouraging me to rest my failing heart. He was relishing his vile performance as the ultimate devoted caregiver, practicing the exact sorrowful expressions he planned to use at my upcoming funeral. He genuinely thought he had masterfully conquered my entire world. He had absolutely no idea that my apparent physical weakness was nothing but a brilliant tactical deception, a beautiful trap designed to keep him perfectly comfortable while the federal authorities rapidly closed in. He was eagerly counting down the final days until my tragic demise, completely blind to the terrifying reality that his own catastrophic destruction was already rushing toward him. His ultimate absolute downfall was now fully guaranteed and meticulously orchestrated forever. The compilation of Traven's complete destruction required an execution of digital architecture so precise that no defense attorney could ever dismantle it. I sat in the soundproof basement of my corporate headquarters, running a highly sophisticated decryption program over the massive trove of data I had successfully extracted from his compromised laptop. The fake logistics empire he paraded around Atlanta was nothing but a fragile house of cards, and I was currently converting every single card into federal evidence. I meticulously organized the fraudulent shipping manifests, cross-referencing them directly with the illicit offshore bank transfers. I translated and authenticated every frantic Japanese communication between Travan and Hiroshi, explicitly detailing the $4 million syndicate debt. I packaged the money laundering trails, the fake tax returns, and the brutal $5 million life insurance murder plot into a single, impenetrable digital dossier. I encrypted the massive file utilizing a military-grade cipher key, guaranteeing that only the specific intended recipient could ever access the horrifying contents inside. The next morning, I left my office carrying a seemingly ordinary black leather briefcase. Inside, resting securely in a specialized Faraday pouch, was the encrypted flash drive that would permanently end my husband's freedom. I drove to an unassuming coffee shop located precisely 3 miles outside the city limits. Sitting alone at a small table in the far corner was Special Agent David, a highly decorated operative within the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I had collaborated extensively with David during my previous government contracting years, exposing sophisticated international cyber syndicates. We possessed a deep mutual respect, forged in high-stakes digital combat. I slid into the wooden booth across from him, maintaining a perfectly casual posture. I did not offer a friendly greeting or engage in any polite small talk. I simply placed the black briefcase onto the table and slid it directly across the polished wooden surface. I told David that inside he would find a fully authenticated, comprehensively structured breakdown of a massive ongoing international money laundering operation happening right in his own backyard. I explained that the primary target was actively funneling millions of dollars for a highly violent Japanese criminal syndicate through the commercial ports of Atlanta. I watched his intense eyes widen slightly as I quietly outlined the sheer magnitude of the financial fraud, the forged corporate documents, and the explicit lethal plot to assassinate a wealthy American citizen for a fraudulent multi-million-dollar insurance payout. I did not mention that I was the intended murder victim. I maintained absolute professional detachment, presenting the devastating facts with clinical precision. David took the briefcase, his demeanor shifting instantly from casual observer to a highly focused federal operative. He recognized the profound gravity of my intelligence immediately. He promised to personally oversee the rapid deployment of a specialized federal task force, assuring me that if the provided evidence was as bulletproof as I claimed, massive federal indictments would be issued incredibly swiftly. I stood up from the booth, smoothing my designer skirt perfectly, and walked out of the coffee shop into the bright morning sunlight. The federal trap was officially set and armed. I had successfully handed the absolute most dangerous men in the government the exact roadmap required to completely annihilate my husband. The rapid countdown to his catastrophic arrest had officially begun, and nothing on earth could stop it now. He was entirely and completely oblivious to the monumental storm rapidly rushing toward him. The justice he deserved was finally moving forward with absolute and undeniable legal certainty without any further delay. I certainly did not forget about my dear sister-in-law, Keisha, the hostile, greedy parasite who had aggressively barged into my pristine kitchen and shamelessly demanded $20,000 while actively conspiring to forcefully administer my fatal dose of poison. She genuinely believed she was a brilliant, untouchable player in her brother's murderous syndicate game. She was absolutely nothing but a sloppy, highly ignorant amateur, operating entirely out of her depth. I returned to my secure workstation and initiated a completely separate digital offensive dedicated strictly to her complete financial ruin. I did not need to deploy any advanced military-grade encryption breakers to dismantle Keisha's pathetic life. Her digital security was incredibly weak, relying entirely on reused basic passwords and unsecured public networks. I effortlessly slipped into her personal banking portals, her digital tax files, and her social media archives in a matter of seconds. What I uncovered was a staggering, long-running history of blatant, unadulterated tax fraud. For the past 7 consecutive years, Keisha had been aggressively claiming multiple fake dependents on her federal tax returns to artificially inflate her annual refund checks. She had been casually inventing imaginary children utilizing stolen social security numbers she had illicitly purchased from a shady online broker. Furthermore, she had continuously filed fraudulent business expense claims for a luxury hair extension company that legally did not even exist. She was illegally siphoning tens of thousands of dollars from the federal government every single year using the stolen identities of actual living children to fund her expensive leased vehicle and her counterfeit designer handbags. It was a remarkably stupid and easily traceable federal crime. I meticulously downloaded every single fraudulent tax return, every illicit bank deposit record, and the complete digital history of her communications with the identity theft broker. I compiled her entire messy criminal history into a highly organized, neatly formatted digital package. I completely scrubbed my own digital fingerprints from the files using advanced proxy servers, routing my connection through multiple international nodes to guarantee absolute anonymity. I then directly submitted the comprehensive evidence package to the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division via their secured encrypted whistleblower portal. I included a detailed cover letter explicitly outlining the exact methodology of her ongoing tax fraud, ensuring the federal auditors would possess a perfectly clear roadmap to her immediate prosecution. The Internal Revenue Service does not offer leniency or polite warnings for multi-year systematic identity theft and federal tax evasion. They respond with devastating bureaucratic precision, completely seizing bank accounts, garnishing future wages, and aggressively handing out mandatory federal prison sentences. Keisha had smugly demanded a $20,000 handout from the woman she was helping to murder. Instead, I had just successfully handed her a massive unpayable federal tax lien and a guaranteed one-way ticket to a federal penitentiary. She was officially financially and legally doomed forever. Her pathetic existence would soon collapse completely without any mercy or any possible hope of future recovery. 3 days after I delivered the encrypted dossier, David contacted me through our secured secondary communication channel. He confirmed that the explosive evidence I provided had triggered an immediate response within the highest levels of the federal government. The Financial Crimes Division had rapidly cross-referenced my data, discovering that Trayvon and Hiroshi were central figures in a much larger ongoing international investigation. David informed me that the Joint Task Force was fully authorized and absolutely ready to move forward with heavily armed arrest warrants. However, they faced a significant tactical challenge. The syndicate operatives were highly elusive, constantly moving across different jurisdictions. To execute a completely clean sweep, without triggering a frantic international manhunt, the authorities desperately needed all the primary players located inside one single controllable room. They needed Trayvon, Keisha, and Hiroshi gathered together in a highly secure environment where federal agents could easily lock down all available exits. David asked if I had any ability to quietly orchestrate such a specific high-stakes gathering. I smiled a cold, calculating smile as I stared at the encrypted message on my screen. I did not need to invent a complicated reason to gather these dangerous predators together. Trevin was already eagerly providing the absolute perfect execution stage. His monumental narcissism and desperate need for public validation had recently inspired him to plan a massive public event. He had been loudly boasting to our neighbors and church congregation about an upcoming lavish celebration honoring our marriage. He wanted a grand, spectacular audience to witness his fake devotion just days before he expected my sudden tragic heart failure. He wanted to cement his perfect alibi in front of the entire elite African American community of Atlanta. He invited his treacherous sister Keisha to play the doting sister-in-law, and specifically insisted that Hiroshi attend to celebrate their thriving business partnership. The guest list was finalized, and the venue was fully booked. Trayvon believed he was brilliantly setting the stage for my incredibly tragic final performance. He had absolutely no idea that he had just meticulously constructed the exact elaborate trap required for his own spectacular downfall. I typed a rapid, confident response back to David. I told the federal agent that he did not need to worry about gathering the targets. I already had the absolute perfect venue, the perfect date, and the guest list secured for the takedown. The very next morning was Sunday, and Trayvon was particularly eager to attend service at our sprawling megachurch in Midtown Atlanta. He spent an extra 20 minutes in front of the master bathroom mirror, carefully adjusting the silk pocket square of his custom-tailored burgundy suit. He practically vibrated with a sickening level of arrogant energy, completely oblivious to the federal crosshairs securely locked onto his back. We arrived at the massive sanctuary, and he proudly paraded me down the center aisle, clutching my hand tightly for the entire congregation to witness his fake devotion. The pastor delivered a booming sermon about the undeniable strength of holy matrimony and the profound resilience of a faithful partnership. As the service neared its uplifting conclusion, Trayvon unexpectedly stood up from our front row seating. He boldly signaled the head pastor, who warmly handed him the wireless microphone. The entire congregation of 3,000 people grew completely silent, watching my husband take the center stage. Trayvon looked down at me with the most horrifyingly convincing expression of pure, overwhelming love I had ever seen. He told the massive crowd that a strong, independent black man is absolutely nothing without a magnificent queen standing fiercely by his side. He praised my endless grace, my unyielding patience, and my beautiful spirit. He then dramatically announced to the cheering congregation that we were approaching our 5th wedding anniversary. He declared that 5 years of building an empire together was a milestone demanding a monumental celebration. With a grand sweeping gesture, he announced he had exclusively rented out the most prestigious country club in the entire city for a lavish vow renewal ceremony scheduled for this upcoming Saturday evening. He promised a night of breathtaking elegance, flowing champagne, and a profound reaffirmation of our unbreakable eternal vows. The sanctuary absolutely erupted into deafening applause and joyful standing ovations. Elderly women sitting nearby wiped away happy tears, whispering about what an incredibly blessed and highly favored woman I was to have such a dedicated romantic provider. Trayvon soaked up the loud, thunderous admiration, like a sponge expanding his chest and beaming with absolute narcissistic triumph. He walked back down the steps and pulled me into a deep, highly performative embrace while the church choir began to sing a joyous hymn. His strong arms wrapped tightly around my shoulders, squeezing me with a possessive, lethal grip. The congregation saw a wealthy, loving husband, publicly honoring the beautiful wife he cherished beyond measure. I saw a desperate, cornered sociopath meticulously building the ultimate bulletproof stage for his final performance. He was manipulating the community, leveraging their deep faith and genuine support to perfectly construct his impending alibi. He needed these thousands of cheering witnesses to firmly establish his reputation as a devoted family man before he ruthlessly destroyed my life. The sheer theatrical audacity of his public declaration was genuinely staggering to behold, but I maintained my composure, perfectly playing my quietly assigned, highly supportive, beautiful wife role flawlessly. I knew with absolute terrifying clarity the exact malicious reason he had orchestrated this incredibly extravagant public spectacle. Trayvon was not spending tens of thousands of dollars on a country club venue to celebrate our marriage. He was deliberately investing that money to purchase the most convincing theatrical alibi humanly possible. He was inviting the most prominent members of our community, the highly respected church elders, our wealthy neighborhood associates, and his fraudulent business partners to witness his ultimate performance. His dark scheme was sickeningly brilliant in its sheer sociopathic simplicity. During the luxurious reception surrounded by hundreds of adoring guests, completely enchanted by our fake romance, He planned to deliver the grandest speech of his entire life. Following his beautiful, meticulously rehearsed words about his eternal devotion to me, he would raise a special crystal champagne flute for the final celebratory toast. That specific glass would contain the absolute final lethal dose of the rare botanical poison he had been slowly feeding me. I could see the entire horrific sequence playing out vividly inside my mind. I would drink the poisoned champagne, smiling warmly at the cheering crowd. Within minutes, the rapid accumulation of the untraceable toxic compounds would trigger a massive, catastrophic cardiac failure. I would suddenly collapse onto the polished dance floor, clutching my chest in absolute agony. Trayvon would instantly drop his own glass, rushing to my side and falling dramatically to his knees. He would scream for help, crying real tears of absolute panic, while desperately performing frantic, useless chest compressions on his dying wife. The church pastors would gather around us, praying loudly, while the wealthy guests stared in total shock and pure horror. The ambulance would eventually arrive, sirens blaring, but it would be far too late to save my life. The tragic narrative would be instantly and permanently cemented into the minds of every single witness present. Trayvon would effortlessly become the ultimate sympathetic figure, the deeply devoted, heartbroken widower who tragically lost his beautiful young wife right at the absolute peak of their profound happiness. The local authorities would interview the massive crowd of prestigious guests who would all eagerly testify about his immense, undeniable love for me. The police would close the brief medical investigation, immediately citing a completely natural, devastating heart attack. No detective would ever suspect foul play from a man who had just proudly renewed his eternal wedding vows in front of 3,000 church members just days prior. The sheer magnitude of his deceit was almost mechanically perfect. He needed the grand stage, the bright lights, and the loud applause to completely blind the world to the violent execution he was actively orchestrating right in front of them. The country club ballroom was not going to be the joyful sight of our romantic 5th anniversary celebration. It was specifically designed to be the highly glamorous location of my sudden public assassination, ensuring he walked away completely free from any suspicion whatsoever, leaving him exceptionally abundantly wealthy. I stood before the congregation, wiping away perfectly synchronized tears of absolute joy as Trayvon held me close. I gave him exactly the emotional, submissive reaction his massive narcissistic ego demanded in front of all these watching eyes. I softly whispered into the microphone, telling him and the thousands of cheering church members that I was completely overwhelmed by his incredible grand gesture. I falsely claimed that I could not wait to celebrate our eternal bond and proudly stand beside him for the rest of my life. He kissed me deeply, sealing his public alibi with a dramatic theatrical flourish. The moment we stepped out of the sanctuary and away from the admiring crowd, the frantic planning for the extravagant country club party aggressively commenced. Trayvon spent the entire afternoon enthusiastically calling caterers, florists, and event designers, eagerly preparing the beautiful execution chamber. I played the role of the eager, excited bride, picking out elegant centerpieces and selecting the perfect, luxurious emerald green designer gown for the grand occasion. Behind my bright, loving smile, my mind was operating with terrifying, lethal efficiency. I retreated to my soundproof home office under the guise of reviewing table settings. In reality, I was instantly opening my highly secured, encrypted communication channel to Special Agent David at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I typed a rapid, concise update explaining that the primary target had just finalized the absolute perfect time and location for the massive multi-agency tactical sweep. I transmitted the digital floor plans of the country club, mapping out every single exit service door and private suite. I clearly instructed David that the federal raid needed to be meticulously timed to coincide precisely with the final champagne toast. That specific moment would provide the maximum psychological shock, paralyzing the targets completely before they could ever attempt to destroy evidence or violently flee the scene. David confirmed the tactical strategy, immediately assuring me that his heavily armed financial crimes task force would be quietly surrounding the entire perimeter hours before the first guest even arrived. I also sent a highly encrypted secondary message directly to my elite corporate wealth management lawyer, Desmond, ensuring the final irrevocable asset transfers would completely lock down right as the grand party commenced. Everything was flawlessly positioned. Trevon firmly believed he was setting an inescapable deadly trap for me, but he was actually walking blindly into a federal concrete vault I had built just for him. I logged off the secure network, closed my laptop, and walked back into the pristine kitchen where my husband was gleefully sampling expensive cake options. I wrapped my arms around his waist, resting my chin affectionately on his broad shoulder. I smiled coldly, staring at his neck, feeling an immense, overwhelming sense of dark, pure satisfaction. The stage was officially set, the audience was eagerly invited, and the federal trap was perfectly primed. He genuinely thought he was writing the tragic final chapter safely alone, but I held the absolute final pen. The evening of the grand vow renewal arrived with a suffocating blanket of humidity settling over the city of Atlanta. The prestigious country club, a sprawling estate of white marble and manicured gardens, was entirely transformed into a spectacular theatrical stage for my impending murder. Valets in crisp uniforms rushed to open the doors of luxury vehicles as the African-American elite of the city descended upon the venue. Men in custom-tailored tuxedos and women wrapped in imported silk swept through the grand entrance, their diamonds catching the harsh glare of the flash photography Trevon had specifically hired to document his ultimate triumph. The main ballroom was an absolute masterpiece of fraudulent wealth and breathtaking arrogance. Thousands of rare white orchids cascaded from the vaulted ceilings, and thick gold ribbons adorned every single chair. The air inside the room was thick, heavy, with the overwhelming scent of expensive floral arrangements and the intoxicating aroma of roasted meats from the carving stations. The head pastor of our megachurch stood near the ice sculpture, loudly laughing and holding a crystal glass of sparkling water ready to bless the eternal union of a man he considered his most generous patron. Wealthy neighborhood associates mingled near the open bar, eagerly exchanging hushed gossip and admiring the sheer financial magnitude of the event. They were all completely oblivious to the dark, violent reality actively lurking beneath the luxurious surface. Near the back of the massive ballroom, sitting quietly at a private table reserved for our most distinguished international guests, was Hiroshi. He wore a perfectly tailored dark suit and maintained a cold, calculating posture. He sipped his drink slowly, watching the opulent display with the calculating eyes of a syndicate enforcer, waiting to collect his blood debt. He nodded slightly whenever Trevon caught his eye across the crowded room, a silent, chilling acknowledgement of their deadly financial timeline. Every single element of the lavish setting was meticulously engineered to project absolute power, unyielding success, and unbreakable devotion. Trevon was leveraging the deep faith of our church community and the blinding glitter of high society to weave his perfect, impenetrable alibi. He moved through the crowd like a benevolent king, flashing his bright, charismatic smile, firmly shaking hands, and clapping the church elders on their shoulders. He loudly thanked them all for coming to witness the profound celebration of the extraordinary woman he loved more than life itself. The guests ate up his performance, practically swooning over his romantic dedication, completely unaware that their beloved successful community leader was actively counting down the minutes until my heart violently stopped beating. The fake wealth dripping from the crystal chandeliers was funded entirely by my hard work, and yet he strutted across the polished dance floor acting as the sole provider. I watched his flawless performance from the elevated balcony of the bridal suite, looking down at the magnificent sea of sparkling gowns and sharp suits. The sheer, overwhelming irony of the situation was incredibly sharp. They were all dressed impeccably for a celebration of eternal love, completely unaware that they had actually arrived to witness the brutal, spectacular execution of a desperate, cornered sociopath. I took a deep breath, smoothing the heavy emerald green fabric of my designer gown. The extravagant floral arrangements below looked much less like a wedding celebration and far more like a beautiful, tragic memorial. The entire grand facade was officially set humming with the vibrant, arrogant energy of a man who firmly believed he was absolute perfection, completely blind to the federal predators quietly encircling his fragile glass castle today. The heavy wooden door of the bridal suite swung open, shattering my quiet solitude. Keisha strutted into the luxurious room uninvited, wearing a gaudy silver sequined dress that was entirely too tight. She closed the door behind her, leaning against the polished mahogany frame, with a deeply malicious smirk plastered across her heavily contoured face. She was practically vibrating with dark, nervous excitement, completely unable to contain her sick anticipation of the catastrophic medical event she firmly believed was rapidly approaching. She clearly viewed this opulent party as the ultimate finish line, the highly profitable conclusion to their brutal, coordinated assassination plot. She sauntered over to my vanity mirror, pretending to be an incredibly supportive sister-in-law. She placed a cold, manicured hand on my bare shoulder and squeezed tightly. She leaned down, her breath smelling of cheap champagne, and whispered that I looked incredibly beautiful, but perhaps just a little bit pale and sick tonight. She falsely expressed deep concern about my fragile physical condition, cruelly asking if my poor heart was strong enough to handle all the overwhelming excitement waiting downstairs. Her tone was dripping with sickeningly sweet venom. She was brazenly taunting me, ruthlessly enjoying what she thought was her ultimate victory lap. She actually believed she was standing directly over a dying woman, eagerly counting down the exact minutes until she could forcefully inherit the massive $1 million payout she thought was perfectly secured. I did not flinch or pull away from her toxic grasp. I slowly picked up a makeup brush, calmly adding a flawless touch of deep crimson lipstick to my mouth. I met her hostile, greedy gaze directly through the reflection of the brightly lit vanity mirror. I offered her a serene, beautifully composed smile that gave absolutely nothing away. I knew with absolute certainty that her entire pathetic existence was about to be completely annihilated by the federal authorities waiting patiently outside. She was gleefully dancing directly toward a federal prison cell, completely blinded by her own monumental arrogance. I gracefully stood up smoothly, adjusting the elegant bodice of my stunning, emerald green designer gown. The heavy silk draped perfectly over my frame, projecting absolute power and undeniable control. I turned to face the treacherous woman who had actively helped plan my assassination, maintaining my perfect, terrifyingly calm demeanor. I looked her dead in the eye, letting my voice drop into a soft, incredibly smooth register that echoed quietly throughout the luxurious bridal suite. I told Keisha to go downstairs and truly enjoy the lavish party her generous brother had prepared tonight. I promised her with absolute, chilling sincerity that it would undeniably be a spectacular night she would absolutely never forget as long as she lived. She smirked, completely missing the fatal warning hidden underneath my carefully chosen polite words. She spun around on her silver heels and confidently marched out of the room, eagerly heading straight toward her spectacular, unavoidable, and permanent personal ruination. The countdown was ending. A gentle knock signaled that the magnificent grand entrance was finally ready. Trayvon stood proudly in the hallway, offering his arm, with a dazzling, blinding smile. We descended the sweeping marble staircase together, stepping directly into the breathtaking ballroom. The entire crowd of high society guests immediately erupted into thunderous applause, raising their expensive crystal glasses to honor our deeply profound 5-year marital milestone. Trayvon smoothly guided me toward the center of the polished dance floor, eagerly accepting a silver microphone from the event coordinator. He effortlessly commanded the massive room, utilizing his potent narcissistic charm to completely captivate every single person watching his brilliant performance. He began passionately preaching about the undeniable beauty of Black love, aggressively praising the vital importance of unwavering loyalty, and boldly celebrating the monumental financial empire we had supposedly built together. He looked deeply into my eyes, projecting the flawless illusion of a deeply devoted husband while masterfully setting his perfect tragic alibi. I stood perfectly still right beside him, maintaining my bright, adoring smile for the flashing cameras. The sheer audacity of his public deception was absolutely staggering to witness. He was loudly declaring his eternal commitment to protecting my heart, completely aware that he fully intended to permanently stop it from beating within the next 10 minutes. I discreetly scanned the edges of the massive ballroom, searching the heavy shadows near the exit doors. I silently held my breath, feeling my pulse quicken as the tension rapidly escalated toward the ultimate climax. He proudly wrapped his arm tightly around my waist, squeezing me affectionately as the crowd cheered. The highly anticipated moment of absolute destruction was finally here. He signaled for the waiters to approach, eagerly preparing the grand celebratory toast. He thought he was directing a flawless tragedy, completely blind to the brilliant, inescapable federal execution I had secretly orchestrated. I kept my eyes locked on his face, savoring his arrogant pride. He was about to abruptly lose every single glorious thing he had ever stolen from me, and I was fully ready to watch his entire magnificent kingdom burn violently, directly down to the very cold ground tonight. I maintained my perfect posture, radiating sheer confidence while standing directly in the spotlight. The heavy silence of my concealed wrath was deafening. Every second felt monumental. His final fatal mistake was beautifully unfolding without delay. The glorious end arrived now. Trayvon let his deep baritone voice drop to a soft theatrical whisper to deliver the grand conclusion of his sickeningly sweet speech. He looked out at the sea of eager, attentive faces and told them that a man only achieves true greatness when he is propelled forward by the unconditional love of a phenomenal woman. The entire ballroom erupted into another wave of thunderous applause. The church elders nodded with profound approval, while the wealthy socialites dabbed carefully at their eyes with expensive linen napkins. Trayvon lowered the silver microphone and gestured smoothly toward the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the room. A perfectly synchronized line of waiters dressed in immaculate white tuxedos marched gracefully onto the polished dance floor. They carried large, gleaming silver trays loaded with tall crystal champagne flutes. The elegant glasses sparkled brilliantly under the massive overhead chandeliers, catching the warm golden light of the ballroom. The waiters fanned out seamlessly, distributing the expensive vintage champagne to the hundreds of distinguished guests. The atmosphere was absolutely electric with joyful anticipation. Trayvon turned his back to the cheering crowd for just a fraction of a second, signaling a specific waiter who was holding a smaller, separate silver tray containing only 2 crystal flutes. Trayvon reached out with practiced casual elegance and confidently took both glasses. He handed the waiter a crisp $100 bill with a charming wink, playing the role of the generous billionaire host to absolute perfection. He turned back to face me, his dark eyes glittering with a terrifyingly cold, predatory triumph. He held out the slightly taller crystal flute, ensuring his fingers wrapped tightly around the delicate stem. The bubbling golden liquid inside looked completely harmless, entirely identical to the champagne being eagerly consumed by the rest of the high society crowd. But my highly trained eyes immediately caught the incredibly faint, almost imperceptible cloudy residue clinging stubbornly to the inner curve of the expensive crystal glass. He had bypassed the kitchen, entirely executing the lethal addition himself to ensure absolute precise control over my public execution. He stepped in very close, invading my personal space, until I could smell the sharp mint of his expensive custom cologne. He pressed the cold crystal glass firmly into my waiting hand. He leaned down, brushing his warm lips gently against my cheek for the flashing cameras. As the crowd cheered loudly, his voice dropped into a dark, chilling register meant exclusively for my ears. He looked deep into my eyes, his gaze utterly devoid of any human empathy or mercy, and whispered his deadly command. "Drink up, my queen, to our future." He genuinely believed those would be the absolute final loving words I would ever hear on this earth. He eagerly anticipated that within seconds of the liquid hitting my throat, the heavy toxicity would aggressively shock my cardiovascular system into immediate catastrophic failure, ending my life. His arrogant smile was perfectly fixed, masking the monster standing directly in front of me. The entire massive ballroom grew completely silent, waiting eagerly for us to take the grand celebratory drink. Hundreds of elite guests raised their own expensive crystal flutes into the humid air, holding their collective breath to witness the ultimate display of our eternal black love. Trevon stood frozen in his aggressive posture of fake devotion, holding his own untainted champagne glass perfectly steady. He stared directly at my lips, his dark eyes burning with a sick, twisted hunger to finally watch me swallow the fatal dose. I did not move the glass toward my mouth. Instead, I stood completely still directly in the center of the brightly illuminated dance floor, deliberately stretching the heavy silence until it became painfully awkward for everyone watching. I slowly raised the poison glass up to my eye level, inspecting the bubbling golden liquid with an expression of cold, calculating boredom. I gently swirled the lethal champagne, watching the tiny, deadly bubbles violently rush toward the rim. The pristine smile I had perfectly maintained for the past 5 years completely vanished from my face, leaving behind a mask of pure, unyielding ice. I deliberately lowered the crystal flute, bringing it safely away from my face, entirely rejecting his deadly command. A profound wave of visible confusion instantly rippled through the massive crowd. The church elders lowered their glasses, exchanging nervous, worried glances, while the wealthy socialites began to whisper frantically among themselves. Trevon noticed the sudden, terrifying shift in my demeanor, and his arrogant smile immediately tightened into a rigid, panicked grimace. He leaned forward aggressively, his voice dropping into a harsh, desperate hiss, commanding me to stop embarrassing him and drink the champagne right now. I completely ignored his desperate, hostile order. I calmly reached behind me and picked up a heavy silver dessert fork from the beautifully decorated head table. I raised the fork and tapped the metal handle sharply against the side of the poisoned crystal glass. The loud, clear, ringing sound violently sliced through the tense, quiet atmosphere, echoing forcefully across the enormous vaulted ceiling. I turned my freezing gaze back to my panicked husband and firmly demanded that he hand over the silver microphone. Trevon swallowed hard, his chest heaving with sudden, intense anxiety, but his massive, fragile ego completely trapped him in his own public performance. He was standing directly in front of hundreds of incredibly important community leaders and wealthy potential investors. He absolutely could not physically force me to drink the liquid, and he certainly could not aggressively deny his beautiful, loving wife the opportunity to deliver her own emotional anniversary speech. He falsely assumed I was simply overwhelmed by the grand romantic gesture and wanted to publicly express my profound gratitude for his majestic display of wealth. He plastered a strained, painfully fake smile back onto his sweating face and reluctantly handed me the heavy silver microphone. He took a hesitant step back, completely unaware that he had just handed the executioner her sharpest blade now. The cold metal of the silver microphone felt incredibly powerful, securely gripped inside my hand. I slowly turned my body away from my panicking husband, facing the massive crowd of prestigious guests. Every single eye in the opulent ballroom was entirely focused on me, waiting eagerly to hear a beautiful emotional declaration of marital devotion. Instead, I stood tall, radiating absolute, unbreakable authority, completely shedding the pathetic, submissive facade I had flawlessly maintained for the past 5 years. I brought the microphone close to my lips and allowed my voice to boom forcefully across the silent room. I told the audience that Trevon loves to talk endlessly about our magnificent shared future. I paused dramatically, letting the heavy silence amplify my incoming words. But I think it is officially time we take a long, hard look at his future instead. The sudden, aggressive shift in my tone was entirely unmistakable. The soft, romantic atmosphere evaporated instantly, violently replaced by a profound, creeping sense of absolute dread. I saw Keisha sitting at the prominent family table, her smug, arrogant grin completely melting off her heavily contoured face. I saw Hiroshi suddenly sit up extremely straight, spilling his expensive drink onto the pristine white tablecloth, instantly recognizing the terrifying danger of a cornered, unpredictable variable. Trevon lunged forward, his hands frantically reaching out to snatch the microphone back from my grip, but I effortlessly stepped backward, maintaining my dominant position on the polished dance floor. I confidently raised my hand high into the air and snapped my fingers sharply, signaling the audiovisual booth located securely in the upper balcony. I had successfully infiltrated their digital network earlier this afternoon, utilizing my advanced cybersecurity tools to completely overwrite his romantic multimedia presentation. The massive 50-foot high definition projector screen directly behind us, which had been brightly looping beautiful, carefully curated photographs of our luxurious vacations, suddenly cut to pitch black. A loud, jarring electronic screech echoed forcefully through the towering speakers, completely silencing the soft, classical background music. Trayvon spun around wildly, staring at the dark screen in total absolute horror. He realized instantly that he had completely lost control of his meticulously designed execution chamber. The enormous screen aggressively flared back to life, illuminating the entire grand ballroom with an incredibly bright, harsh white light. The very first document displayed in massive, bold, high-contrast lettering was not a loving anniversary photograph. It was the highly classified, completely undeniable toxicology report, confirming the deadly botanical poisons secretly hidden inside his beloved holistic fertility vitamins. The detailed chemical breakdown hovered ominously above our heads, exposing his murderous intentions to the entire elite community. The grand illusion of the devoted, successful black husband was officially permanently shattered in front of hundreds of incredibly important witnesses. I stood directly under the glowing screen, holding the poisoned glass high into the air, boldly prepared to execute the final devastating phase of his total annihilation without any hesitation whatsoever right here tonight. The massive high-definition screen glowing behind me displayed the undeniable chemical breakdown of my husband's beloved holistic fertility supplements. I raised the poisoned crystal flute high into the air, ensuring the glittering chandeliers illuminated the deadly champagne for every single person to witness. I spoke into the microphone, my voice echoing with terrifying clarity. I explained that the specific liquid sloshing inside this beautiful glass was heavily laced with a highly sophisticated synthesized botanical toxin. I informed the horrified crowd that Trayvon had meticulously engineered this exact chemical cocktail to trigger a massive catastrophic heart attack designed to perfectly mimic natural underlying cardiovascular failure. I watched the prominent church elders sitting in the front row physically recoil in absolute disgust. Women clutched their pearls and husbands wrapped protective arms around their wives. Trayvon stood completely frozen, his face a horrifying mask of pure, unadulterated panic as his pristine reputation violently disintegrated. He opened his mouth to shout, but his vocal cords entirely failed him. I did not give him a single second to recover his shattered composure. I clicked the remote hidden inside my hand, immediately transitioning the massive screen to the next devastating slide. 5 separate digital documents aggressively flashed across the projector, displaying 3 massive fraudulent life insurance policies. The staggering total of $5 million glared down at the elite guests in bold, heavy red font. I smoothly pointed out the forged signatures at the bottom of the contracts, explaining exactly how my devoted, loving husband had secretly placed a massive multi-million-dollar bounty directly onto my head. I highlighted the beneficiary designations, clearly showing his personal offshore accounts, and his toxic sister Keisha, listed to receive the entire payout upon my sudden tragic demise. A loud collective gasp violently ripped through the opulent ballroom. The sheer calculated malice of the financial documents completely shattered any remaining doubt within the minds of our wealthy neighbors and community leaders. Trayvon was completely exposed as a ruthless, cold-blooded predator who had shamelessly weaponized the sacred institution of holy matrimony for his own massive financial gain. The thick, heavy silence of the Grand Country Club was instantly replaced by a chaotic wave of outraged whispers and angry shouts. People were openly pointing at Trayvon, their faces twisted with intense revulsion. He frantically looked toward the heavy mahogany exit doors, desperately seeking a rapid escape route from the magnificent execution chamber he had proudly funded. But the exits were securely guarded. I maintained my commanding stance, completely controlling the chaotic room with absolute unwavering authority. My heart hammered with cold, pure adrenaline. I had successfully cornered a highly dangerous sociopath right in the center of his own luxurious stage. The explosive destruction of his fake logistics empire was progressing with flawless mechanical precision, but the darkest layers of his betrayal were still waiting to be brutally exposed to the blinding, bright, unforgiving light tonight. He had absolutely nowhere to hide, and his ultimate ruination was beautifully assured completely. Before Trevon could physically lunge forward and aggressively snatch the silver microphone from my hand, I ruthlessly clicked the presentation remote a second time. The projector screen instantly shifted to the next devastating slide, completely stripping away any remaining facade of his fraudulent marital devotion. Extremely high-resolution photographs aggressively illuminated the opulent ballroom, showcasing his secret 23-year-old Instagram model mistress, lounging happily in the glorious Miami sunlight. She was wearing a tiny designer bikini, proudly displaying her very prominent, heavily pregnant stomach, while smiling radiantly for the camera. Trayvon was prominently featured in several vibrant photographs, kissing her passionately and holding expensive designer baby clothes. The collective gasp from the elite crowd was deafening, perfectly mirroring the absolute shock currently radiating from my husband's terrified face. The prominent church members stared in absolute disbelief at the undeniable photographic proof of his highly coordinated double life. But I was far from finished. I clicked the remote again, quickly transitioning the screen to heavily magnified screenshots of the vile text messages exchanged directly between Trayvon and his toxic sister. The digital text bubbles boldly exposed their incredibly sick collaborative celebration of my impending assassination. Keisha's deeply malicious words mocked my tragic physical demise, openly bragging about her guaranteed $1 million cut of the bloody insurance payout and eagerly anticipating the arrival of her powerful new nephew. The audience read the horrifying messages in real time, quickly connecting the dots between the fake logistics empire, the lethal fertility poison, and the hidden Miami mansion, purchased entirely with my stolen corporate wealth. Keisha realized her absolute ruination was suddenly completely inescapable. She let out a piercing, blood-curdling scream that violently shattered the heavy, chaotic murmurs of the stunned crowd. She practically jumped out of her expensive gold chair, her heavy sequined dress flashing wildly, as she frantically sprinted toward the towering wooden exit doors at the back of the magnificent ballroom. She desperately pushed against the thick brass handles, throwing her entire body weight against the heavy wood, but the doors absolutely refused to budge. They were securely heavily locked from the outside, exactly as I had meticulously arranged with the federal task force. Keisha began violently pounding her fists against the impenetrable barricade, sobbing uncontrollably, her heavy makeup streaming down her terrified face in thick, dark streaks. She screamed for somebody to open the doors, screaming that she was entirely innocent and that I was completely insane. The wealthy guests merely stared at her pathetic display with sheer unadulterated disgust, perfectly content to watch the treacherous parasite completely self-destruct. Trevon realized his beautiful sister was hopelessly trapped, and his entire pristine reality was brutally imploding right in front of him. His highly aggressive nature instantly took over, entirely bypassing any logical thought. The charming, devoted husband facade completely violently vanished, leaving behind a furious, cornered animal desperately seeking to eliminate the immediate threat. He aggressively charged directly toward me, his dark eyes burning incredibly intensely now. Trayvon lunged wildly across the polished hardwood floor, his massive hands violently reaching out to aggressively wrap around my neck. He screamed at the absolute top of his lungs, shouting frantically that I was entirely crazy and that I had maliciously faked every single piece of the digital evidence currently displayed on the massive glowing screen. He roared that I was a bitter, deeply jealous woman, desperately attempting to publicly ruin a powerful, highly respected black businessman because I could not provide him with a legitimate heir. His chaotic, desperate outburst was so incredibly pathetic and utterly transparent that it completely failed to generate even a single ounce of sympathy from the profoundly disgusted guests watching his total meltdown. I did not flinch. I did not take a single protective step backward. I stood my ground, perfectly maintaining absolute terrifying stillness as he aggressively closed the remaining physical distance between us. The heavy crystal champagne flute containing his meticulously engineered lethal botanical poison remained securely locked within my unyielding grip. Right before his desperately reaching hands could ever make physical contact with my body, several powerful men from our local church congregation decisively intervened. 3 heavily built ushers, aggressively tackled Trevon, grabbing him by his custom-tailored tuxedo jacket and violently wrestling him back away from me. They pinned his flailing arms firmly behind his broad back, completely neutralizing the pathetic immediate physical threat. Trayvon fiercely struggled against their tight physical restraint, furiously kicking his polished leather shoes, while violently screaming a relentless torrent of vile absolute profanities directly at my completely unbothered face. I smoothly raised the microphone back up to my lips, silencing his frantic, pathetic outburst with my commanding absolute presence. I slowly turned my cold, calculating gaze away from my violently struggling husband and locked my intense eyes directly onto Hiroshi. The wealthy Japanese syndicate partner was currently attempting to quietly, subtly slip away into the dark, heavy shadows, completely abandoning Trayvon to his spectacular public ruination. Hiroshi froze instantly, suddenly feeling the heavy, oppressive weight of my absolute, undivided attention, pinning him firmly in place. I stared deeply into Hiroshi's terrified eyes, and then slowly, effortlessly delivered the absolute ultimate devastating payoff to this entire horrifying saga. In flawlessly crisp, impeccably pronounced Tokyo dialect, Japanese, I clearly projected my final lethal message directly through the loud, towering ballroom speakers, ensuring the brutal translation would echo flawlessly inside his panicked mind forever. I told him I specifically promised that the vintage wine was exclusively meant for a sudden funeral, and tonight, the glorious funeral being magnificently celebrated here is absolutely yours. The sheer, utter, terrifying shock that violently ripped across Hiroshi's face was absolutely undeniably spectacular to witness right here tonight. Both incredibly arrogant men finally realized their inevitable, inescapable destruction was totally complete and wonderfully perfect. I stood victoriously smiling at their profound, absolute silence, completely savoring the glorious, beautiful revenge I meticulously, flawlessly, expertly, perfectly delivered today. I truly, definitively won the entire war. Before Hiroshi could even process the terrifying translation echoing in his mind, the heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom were violently kicked open. A deafening crash shattered the remaining tension as dozens of heavily armed federal agents and local police officers aggressively stormed the luxurious country club. The pristine white floral arrangements trembled as tactical boots hit the polished hardwood floor. Chaos erupted instantly, but the authorities moved with ruthless mechanical precision. Trayvon, who was still fiercely struggling against the church ushers, was immediately tackled directly to the ground by three massive federal agents. They slammed him face first into the expensive marble floor, pinning his arms violently behind his back. The cold metal handcuffs snapped sharply around his wrists, securing him tightly inside his ruined, custom-tailored tuxedo. He screamed frantically, begging someone to listen to his pathetic lies, but the agents swiftly hauled him onto his feet, completely ignoring his desperate, pathetic cries. Across the room, Hiroshi desperately attempted to sprint toward the kitchen service exit. Two undercover officers who had been disguised as waitstaff effortlessly intercepted him, violently slamming him hard against the elegant mirrored bar. Crystal glasses shattered loudly, raining expensive liquor and broken glass all over his tailored suit as he was aggressively cuffed and secured. Meanwhile, near the back exit, Keisha was experiencing her own spectacular downfall. Agents from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division intercepted her frantic escape attempt. They firmly grabbed her arms forcefully, slapping handcuffs onto her wrists. She wailed uncontrollably, screaming that she was a wealthy, innocent woman and aggressively demanding a lawyer. Thick black mascara mixed with heavy foundation streamed violently down her terrified face, completely destroying her perfect, glamorous makeup. She was practically dragged across the immaculate carpet, her silver sequined dress catching the harsh flashlights of the tactical teams. The entire high society crowd of Atlanta elite stood frozen in absolute, shocked silence. The wealthy neighbors, the church elders, and the prominent business leaders watched in complete horror as the magnificent illusion of black excellence was brutally dragged out the front doors in federal chains. I stood perfectly still in the absolute center of the ruined ballroom, watching the magnificent destruction unfold with deep, cold satisfaction. I handed my poisoned crystal champagne flute directly to the lead federal investigator, officially surrendering the absolute final piece of lethal physical evidence. My survival was now safely secured. Fast forward exactly 7 months later. The magnificent criminal empire Trayvon desperately attempted to build utilizing my hard-earned money had entirely collapsed into worthless federal dust. Facing an absolute mountain of undeniable digital evidence, including the toxicology report, the forged life insurance documents, and the explicit money laundering ledgers, Trayvon was completely cornered by the aggressive federal prosecution team. Realizing he had absolutely zero chance of winning a lengthy public trial, he shamelessly accepted a strict plea deal specifically to avoid a mandatory life sentence. He received 25 hard years inside a maximum security federal penitentiary without any possibility of early parole for attempted murder and massive international wire fraud. His toxic sister Keisha faced her own spectacular financial and legal ruination. The aggressive federal auditors from the Internal Revenue Service successfully convicted her of systematic multi-year tax evasion and criminal identity theft. She permanently lost her luxury apartment, her leased vehicle, and every single designer item she had fraudulently purchased. She was aggressively sentenced to 5 strict years in a federal prison, completely stripped of her immense, unearned, arrogant pride. The consequences extended rapidly to the young 23-year-old pregnant mistress hiding down in Florida. Because the magnificent $1.2 million beachfront Miami condominium was aggressively purchased, utilizing entirely stolen, laundered corporate funds, the federal government effortlessly and swiftly seized the massive luxury property. Federal marshals served her a sudden, unyielding eviction notice, violently throwing her out onto the sunny street. The glorious, luxurious future she had eagerly, aggressively plotted to steal from my dead hands was permanently, utterly, thoroughly destroyed forever. The entire fake kingdom had brutally fallen, leaving the dangerous, greedy parasites with absolutely nothing but cold steel bars. An absolute, total, devastating failure today, finally right here, right now. I am currently sitting safely on the expansive private balcony of my beautifully secured new penthouse right in the very heart of Atlanta. I am looking completely relaxed, wearing a luxurious silk robe and slowly sipping a genuinely safe, untainted glass of extremely expensive red wine. The cool evening breeze softly touches my skin as I quietly reflect on the incredible, immense strength it truly took to successfully survive such a deeply horrific betrayal. It would have been incredibly easy to break down, to cry, and to wildly confront my murderous husband right inside that exclusive sushi restaurant. But absolute true power does not ever come from loud, frantic reactions. Absolute, undeniable true power always comes from complete, devastating patience, from maintaining absolute, deadly silence while relentlessly gathering the fatal evidence required to utterly, violently strike back and perfectly destroy your dangerous enemies. Never shrink yourself to fit into a narcissist's world, and never underestimate the power of playing the fool until it's time to play the executioner. It is incredibly vital to carefully protect your peace, to fiercely guard your hard-earned bank accounts, and to always absolutely trust your own brilliant, capable, beautiful mind. Have you ever had to carefully, cleverly expose a deeply toxic, dangerously manipulative partner, or a highly deceptive, lying family member to successfully, fiercely protect your own beautiful, successful life? Exactly how did you brilliantly handle the massive conflict when they relentlessly, desperately, viciously tried to brutally tear you completely, absolutely forever, entirely down to the very dark, cold ground? Please bravely share your incredibly powerful, triumphant stories directly down below in the comment section today. Do not forget to hit the like button, fiercely, heavily subscribe to this channel, and boldly share this exact video to support empowering content forever right here now.